Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is that Lou? Did Lou show up? Yeah, hi Lou.
Hi, Lou.
So,
Uh,
my experience is,
Corinthians, Matt?
yeah, so I'm going to show some scripture that we were indoctrinated with in the charismatic church, and these scriptures are basically the backbone of everything that we felt we should do. And I didn't realize this as I was preparing this, that my dad, he was the one that kind of took our family to the charismatic church. He was basically just doing what the church and the Bible told him to do. So, in my mind, I kind of thought, oh, there's so many stupid things that we did, and I'm embarrassed by it. But I'm reading these scriptures again years later. He was doing exactly what the Bible told him to do, what the Bible said he could do, and the church preached it, 2 or 3 times a week. So you've got it right here in front of you. Just very quickly, whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. I mean, boom. Who isn't out there that's a Christian not doing that right now? Asking for all these things. And if you have faith, you're going to get it. How can you go wrong? We walk by faith, not by sight. So that means you're not supposed to believe what you see. You believe by faith. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible to you. Nothing will be impossible with God. If 2 of you agree here on earth concerning anything you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you.
Yeah, they're really remarkable.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying they're really remarkable.
Yeah.
I see where you're going, and it's just remarkable that there are such verses that are obviously false.
And these are straightforward. I don't see how anybody could misinterpret these. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. So there's another one reflecting, if you don't think something seems right, forget that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And then all things are possible for one who believes.
Yeah, that's pretty, yeah.
So
that says a lot right there.
So that sets up my whole, from 13 years and on through high school. That pretty much was my life in my household. And my dad really took those scriptures seriously. And anybody that didn't take those seriously, well, what kind of believer are you if you're not going to take those seriously, right? So he thought he was being the best faithful Christian ever just by following that.
Good father.
So some of
I want just add one thing. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Eric.
That list looks very familiar, having been raised Seventh-day Adventist, but one loudly absent verse that we were taught in addition to all those was in all your ways acknowledge him and lean not on your own understanding, or something to that effect. But that was one that we had to recite, every day before we went out to recess, 5 times a day, basically, just to make sure you didn't start. It was something to the effect of lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, meaning God. It was, and I went to Bible school, or a church-run school all the way through high school. So you were very much not encouraged to challenge ideas, and it leads into that whole thing about how the more mysterious it is, the truer it is, and the less sense it makes, the more valid it must be. It's very circular, but anyway,
there's a similar verse, something to the effect that man's wisdom is but foolishness in the eyes of God. So
yeah, I heard that one too.
Yeah.
I'll
So,
come back to my whole story, but just the last
Reason up rationally.
tipping point for me was attending the Methodist Church, pretty liberal. And the pastor had a sermon, and he said, life gets pretty tough. You got to reach for something, and all you got to do is just put everything you think you know aside and just believe. And that was the tipping point that got me into the hub there a couple of years ago. So go ahead, we'll finish. I'll get back to mine some other time. But
Yeah,
just
you should tell your story too, Chuck.
Sure.
That'd be great.
But again,
So,
that's the tipping point that I didn't have before.
right. So Lou, are you connected successfully?
I think so. I
think-
hear everybody.
Okay.
You sound better now.
So
Yeah.
I'm just going to go through real quick some of the experiences, and I won't get too in depth with them because I do want to get to, Eric's experiences as well. But our family wanted to go on a trip to California and see an evangelist, Kenneth Copeland. I don't know if anybody remembers that dude.
Oh yes.
We didn't have the money, but reading the scriptures, we didn't need to have the money. We just needed to pray and believe that money would be put in our mailbox. Somehow, somewhere, God would help us go.
Just find a gas can for gas along the side of the road.
So the biggest thing for us is we had to show faith and believe that we were going. So my dad said, grab your suitcase, pack your bags. You need to act like you believe you're going. And so that was a lot of pressure on us to act that way and get everything ready. And knowing that we didn't have plane tickets, we didn't have money, we had nothing. There was nothing showing that we were going, but we had to believe that we were going. And the day came, the day went, we didn't go. And I don't remember exactly the feeling in the house, but nothing was really said. And we all unpacked our bags and we just went on with our life. And looking back
How old
on
were you
that,
at the
just
time?
what?
Sorry to interrupt. How old were you at the time?
Probably 10 or no, I'm saying 13 and older was when I was in the charismatic church. So
Yeah.
13, 14. Yeah.
Okay.
And when you're at that age, you don't really question your parents that much. You really believe that they know what they're doing. And so we just kind of, went on our way. My dad put a lot of money in tithe to the church because somewhere in the Bible it says that that's the priority. Before you do anything else, you take money off of your, out of your checking account and you give it to God first, you give it to the church, and then you figure out how much is left for your family, right? So we actually were out of money several times. And there my dad is praying, please, bring us money, somehow slip it in the mailbox. And then here comes his parents, my grandma and grandpa, knocking on the door, and they have bags of groceries for us. And you know what he saw out of that? That God answered his prayer. And it was his parents, knowing that he didn't have money and we didn't have food in our cupboards. They stepped up and they brought us groceries. But my dad saw that as God answering his prayer and bringing food. I have experience with the charismatic church where they call people up to line up, and the pastor will go one by one and lay his hand on your forehead. And then there's two people behind you ready to catch you when you fall back from the power of God. And there is so much buildup to that in the sermon that you are believing that something's going to happen to you. And so I remember going up and, by the time the pastor comes to me, my heart was pounding and I am expecting something awesome to happen or to feel. And as soon as he laid his hand on me, he's speaking in tongues and he's working it up, to a frenzy. And then he lays his hand on me And I swear I felt a jolt of electricity go through me, and I fell back and got caught by the people and laid down. And it is such an utter creation of your own imagination how that happens, because you're letting it and you're building it up, and so this has been proven. There's another man out there that has these seminars, and he's proving to people that I can make you feel like something great is about to happen, and you're going to think it's happening, but it's all made up in everybody's minds.
I just want to add one thing on that particular point. I just came across a linguist this past week who was talking about the phenomenon of echolalia and speaking in tongues and a bunch of related psychological phenomena. And he points out that in no known language is there any of the patterns that you see in the tongue speaking behaviors. So you commonly hear repeated syllables, and they just repeat one after the other in rapid succession, or maybe they alternate back and forth. And they're also consisting entirely of the phonemes of the speaker's native language, as opposed to being different, which, so if you're speaking English, you're only going to use English vowels and never Portuguese vowels or accents in your supposed speaking in tongues experience. And yeah, that's very fascinating how little work you have to do to kind of get past that and realize it's not actually some sort of divine intervention. And I, my church did very little of that, but the little bit that they tried to get us to do, I was just bad at improv, so I didn't do well at that. Anyway, it's fascinating, I think.
Yeah, one thing that amazes me is like how some people, see the reality of the situation and get out, and others don't. And also you wonder how many people are pretending, to believe, because they don't want to lose their community and their friends, and everything that they know. I mean, they're scared to death of what's out there because it's all unknown. Besides what their community is doing to them or teaching them, about God and all that.
I have heard from a former Pentecostal minister who said that when he was speaking in tongues for the better part of, I think, 2 decades, he said that he legitimately felt that he was being the mouthpiece for something supernatural. And even though it was his own, mind convincing him of that, it's very powerful. And the other side of this that I've seen work to great effect is the power of using music to kind of sweep the emotions of a crowd. And I'm a professional musician, so I find that particularly fascinating. And every now and then I actually do play at some church services as a substitute, and just dipping back into that world and realizing how powerful the effect of music is over the sense of emotions and the center of your mind. It has very little to do with what you're actually hearing in terms of the words or substance, but just the shape of the music can dictate so much about how you feel in that moment at a very primal level.
Surely in that 19th century planet on the other side of the sun that so many Americans believed in, surely that's where they spoke in tongues.
Oh, on the alternate Earth, on the other side of the sun, that's going around at the same rate that we are, so we can't see it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of Americans believed in that, and they actually sent astronomical teams to try to see it during the eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Yep.
Okay. So to continue, to this day, my dad still speaks in tongues. And when we're together, sometimes I can hear it under his breath, and he's doing it very softly. So it has become part of his nature, and I don't think he could ever give it up. And I believe that this whole, what was happening in our family with this extreme belief is actually what broke my mom and dad up and caused them to get a divorce. My dad blamed my mom for not believing enough because of one of the scriptures says, when two or more come together, you will get what you pray for. And my dad believed that he didn't get what he prayed for because my mom was doubting too much.
That's so painful. I'm sorry to hear that. But it's based on the scripture.
Right, right. Also, that the scripture that says you can move the mountain from here to there, my dad took it literally. So he purchased mountain property that had mineral rights associated with it, and he would go up and pray on that property because and pray for it to just gold to come to the surface, for him to mine. And I mean, nothing happened.
Who did he blame that on?
Probably my mom, I mean, the whole time they were married, she was supposed to be his partner in faith, right?
Yeah.
We were to answer the telephone. I'm going to change my maiden last name just to protect, my dad. But we would say, "Praise the Lord, Johnson Residence." Every time we answer the phone, "Praise the Lord, Johnson Residence."
Yeah.
I tell you, it just talk about embarrassing,
Some of your story is resonating with me, but I should be quiet. I'll let you finish. Sorry, Cyril.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to get through mine because I want other people to share too.
Yeah.
Me being a normal teenager, I had a face full of acne. And the go-to thing that my dad felt we needed to do is, the family to lay their hands on me and pray for me and cast the devil out of me because pimples were from the devil. Okay. After a while, things were not changing. And my mom, with the common sense that she had, she finally took me to a dermatologist. That started to make sense to me. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't have a lack of faith.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything wrong. I just need to go to the dermatologist and get some medication, and the pimples went away.
Magic.
Yeah.
Sent the dermatologist.
Yeah. Also because, young teenagers and especially young girls, struggle with kind of depression and figuring themselves out. Well, I was like no other, I was like all the other young teenage girls and wanting to know what I was going to do with my life. But I was told that I needed to pray to God, and God would reveal himself to me and tell me what I'm supposed to do. Well, that never happened. So I really, really fell into a depression and thought that it was my fault, that I'm not hearing God. I don't have enough faith. And I think that's just a shame. That's just unnecessary pressure to put on a teenage girl.
Have you read a book called Educated, about a young woman that kind of resonates with that background?
Right. I have heard of that book. That's like a bestseller book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing book.
One thing back right before, before I left the Nazarene Church, that's where I grew up as a young child. I don't know if you guys remember the movie from 1972 called A Thief in the Night.
Oh, the
Nazarene Church played that movie and invited everybody to come and see it. And it traumatized me as a child. The plot of the movie is that the return of Christ, the rapture happens, and all of a sudden there's these cars in the middle of the road that don't have people in them anymore. And there's people that have just disappeared off the face of the earth. And this one lady, her husband is gone. And so she's trying to find out what happened. And there's a lot in that movie. I recommend you guys watching it. But I went home and I was scared to go to bed because I was scared the next morning my family would be gone. Yeah. So for I don't know how long, I begged my mother to be able to sleep on the floor right by her bed for however long because I was scared my family was going to be gone. Now that to me is almost borderline child abuse. Showing somebody a movie like that, that's like showing a child like a rated R movie, which is completely out of their, mental realm and traumatizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's child abuse. Oh.
Yeah. So, and then after I had my son George, we had a play date. A young little boy came over. He was a Christian from a Christian family, but George and him were playing, and he just somehow asked George, "Do you believe in God?" And George said no. And oh my gosh, the boy just had the hardest time with that. And George comes and tells me, and I, like, well, just don't talk about it. You guys don't need to talk about God. I mean, you're 6 years old for crying out loud. And then his mother comes and picks him up, and says, "Oh, Thomas said that George said he didn't believe in God." And I said, "Yeah, we really haven't taught him one way or the other. We're going to wait till he grows up and he can figure out what he believes." Her face just turned red and she stomped out to her car, and I never saw her again.
Or the kid.
Yeah. That really hit me hard. I mean, because I liked this woman, she was a friend, and to have that reaction, I started to think maybe what it felt like in times past of religious persecution, right? Of just being persecuted for your belief or non-belief.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I've ever felt that feeling.
I'm glad they don't burn dermatologists anymore at the stake.
What?
I'm glad they don't burn dermatologists at the stake anymore.
It's interesting, the name of the church, because for a number of years, my ex-wife and I attended the Church of the Nazarene. And it was a little, it was a spin-off, I think, of Methodist, a little bit less conservative, or more conservative than Methodist church, but it wasn't what you're saying. So there must be some different Nazarene varieties.
Right. So as my child, say that again, Lou?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I always wondered what the use of the word Nazarene that church is using. Is it the revolutionaries that lived in the first century against the Empire of Rome, or was it that they were from Nazareth?
I think the latter.
Because the Aramaic root of the two words is totally different. A Nazarene is not someone from Nazareth.
Well, anyways, let me finish up real quick here. So my dad found out that we were not teaching George Christianity, and he said, "Well, Cheryl, how are you teaching him that it's not okay to murder somebody? How is he going to know not to murder somebody?" And I said, "Because we're teaching him that it's not okay to murder somebody." But that connection with, the teachings of Christianity directly tied to morality is so strong that a lot of people feel like if you're not a Christian, then you're just not being taught those morals.
Yeah, they try to own morality, and that's a bunch of BS.
Right.
I struggled with the same thing when I left my religion. What is the basis of my morality? But I try to not interrupt you, Cheryl, and then I keep doing it, so I'll let you finish.
That's okay. And I want this to be casual, but in the sense of time, I'm trying not to run on myself and be too talkative. So to finish my experience, it all changed with me when I went to college. And I have heard that with so many other people. There's something about leaving your home where your parents pretty much control what you learn, and leaving and being on your own and going to college. and you are listening to very clear, logical things. And I remember sitting in a chemistry class, and they're just showing the details of a molecule and how these chemicals react together. And it's just, there's a lot of logic and sense around it. And I'm like, so that's how that works. That's really cool. Well, God, so God doesn't need to control that. There's no God needed there. But then I would constantly protect my faith, my Christianity, and say, but it's amazing what he set in motion. So it's the typical thing of you're pushing God further and further out, but he's ultimately in control of everything that is automatically happening. So you're still a Christian, right? As you learn more and more of science. And then after a while, it just didn't make sense anymore to keep doing that. So it made more sense to just keep asking logical, scientific questions and just forget about the existence of God. Just focus on logic and reason. And my life became super simple after I gave up God, admitted to being an atheist. All of those requirements and expectations and heaven, hell, all of that just dropped off my worry list. And I'm a super happy person now.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I will be leaving soon, but I just want to interject that for me, things were simpler, but they were also traumatic. I had a lot of trauma to deal with in the meantime. I don't know if you experienced that. I had a lot of adjustment to make. So it wasn't like, oh, now all of a sudden everything's great. Once I recognized that I don't believe in God anymore, there's a lot of trauma. So I don't know if you relate to that as well.
I think that I believe that I don't have trauma because I did have a really good childhood overall. It's just the psychological.
No trauma associated with leaving?
No, because I don't associate with anybody in that realm anymore. And my husband is an atheist just like me. And we don't talk to family about it. So there's a clean separation between everything we're doing atheist and, family that still believe and are very strong Christian. So I think it's been easy to kind of separate ourselves from the past. So no, I don't feel a lot of trauma.
I'd be interested in hearing more about that, but as I'm leaving, I just want to thank you for sharing such a personal story. I appreciate
thank you, John.
that.
It's nice to have you here.
Hey, John, if you have a few more minutes, then maybe you could tell more of your story, unless you got to go right now.
No, my meeting starts at 4, so I'll just take a few minutes. For me, it was traumatic because I recognized I couldn't believe in God anymore, but several principles were still ingrained in me, such as what you mentioned, that our morality comes from God. So if I don't believe in God anymore, what is the source of my morality? I noticed that I didn't want to steal someone. What's that? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're having trouble.
Keep going, John. We can hear you now.
Or can we? I think we might have lost. I think he froze up.
Are you there, John?
So, John, we're not hearing you, and your picture's frozen.
Maybe he's experiencing that past trauma.
Yeah, let me move.
Maybe the Lord's interfering. The band, Lord God's taking over the bandwidth.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
How's this? Okay,
yes.
So I moved inside and closer to the router. You can still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Just another thing was the concept of love. We were taught God is the origin of love. And we were presented with a triangle. If you want to move closer to your family, so God's at the top of the triangle, you're at another corner, and family's at another, or friends. And the only way to move closer to family is to move closer to God, because God's the source of all love. You had to move up the triangle toward God. Just things like this that I was confused with and had to sort out. You guys froze up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So I, in general, once I realized I didn't believe in God anymore, it felt as if I'd had a safety net under me that was suddenly yanked away. And I never even knew that safety net was there, but I felt the absence of the safety net, and the world seemed like a more dangerous place. So
Right.
I'm not hearing anyone, so I think I might be frozen again.
Oh, we hear you.
You're okay.
Okay.
Hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys know the comedian Julia Sweeney. She used to be on SNL, but she talks about her becoming an atheist. She said it like looking at the world as an atheist it's like you're putting on different glasses. Than what you're used to. It's like and just what does the world look like as an atheist? And it can be scary. She could only put that on for so long, and she'd have to take the glasses off. So I related to that. There's an adjustment for me like that. So that's just a few comments from my experience.
Yeah. Thank you, John, for
That's-
sharing
that's
that.
good. Yeah.
So,
Thanks,
yeah,
John.
John,
Yeah,
we'll
I
let
appreciate
you
you having
go.
this meeting for a second.
Okay. Bye,
Okay.
John.
Okay. Bye,
Yeah. Good seeing you. See you
So
next
I don't
time.
know
everyone.
if this is a good
Yeah, you
transition.
too.
Is this a good transition time for Eric? Did you want to share more of your experiences?
Sure. I mean, it's such a big topic. So I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, and it's pretty crazy. I mean, there's not a lot that I could really reduce. So maybe I'll hit a few highlights, or maybe highlights is the wrong word. I'll hit a few outstanding memories, and maybe we can just talk about those. But I'm assuming most of you are probably vaguely familiar with it, or have at least heard of SDAs. They're not one of the more well-known religions in the United States, at least. They have a fairly strong worldwide presence. They, in my experience, are very self-conscious about their beliefs and how kind of bizarre it is on the inside. I didn't know a lot about the Mormons actually growing up. I just knew that they were the crazy guys in uniforms. And now that I've done a lot more digging into that, turns out they are not the crazy guys. Seventh-day Adventism is kind of I would maybe describe it as a sloppy counterfeit of Mormonism. Started out by William Miller with the Millerite movement in upper Rochester, I guess, New York. When he predicted the end of the world in 1844, but he didn't have the same sort of street smarts and cunning that who was it? Brigham Young had, was it Joseph Smith? Whoever started it. He was okay. Yeah, he was very good at kind of sweet talking his way through things. William Miller, on the other hand, was more or less an unread farmer who was just making a lot of guesses at things, and he wasn't as good at forming large groups of people, but the people that he got were willing to buy in all the way. So they would sell their houses and things like that, quit their jobs, because ostensibly Jesus was coming in 1844. So you need to be on your roof that morning or else. And, as we all know, that was a mistake. So they kind of regrouped and formed what's now known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But they also, just a few years out of phase with Mormonism, they needed a prophet. So they more or less co-opted a young girl named Ellen White, who by modern accounts seems to have suffered from some sort of brain trauma at an early age. She was famously hit in the head, and this is part of normal church lore that they tell us as a kid. And it's spun in a way that makes you think that the brain trauma opened her mind, I guess, to receiving visions from God. There are more modern and seemingly accurate medical explanations for hallucinating after a brain trauma, but take your pick, I guess. So she was the front runner for the church, and it's kind of strange too, because Adventists are not very open towards women in positions of leadership. There's definitely not an equality between the genders. It's very patriarchal. The woman is to raise the children and be the supporting figure in the family where the father leads it. And yet there is a woman who is essentially leading the church for a while. And what's kind of fascinating is that a lot of her beliefs, the overwhelming majority, were plagiarized from modern, contemporaneous medical writings at the time, which were usually just old wives' tales and had no scientific merit to them. She would more or less copy it down, publish it under her own name, and be kind of trying to position herself as a medical expert of sorts. And so that's where things like the modern Adventist belief that caffeine is a sin, weird things like mustard is also in that same category. Obviously alcohol and drugs are forbidden, which isn't the worst idea they've come up with. But that's something they share a lot of similarities with the Mormon church. They have similar prohibitions, like you can't sell Coca-Cola in a vending machine on campus. And they go through a lot of hoops to make sure that doesn't happen. Things like that, just cultural idiosyncrasies like that. As you know, on the civil rights front, the Mormons they officially renounced their belief that Black people were a lesser race or lesser people of some sort. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is kind of plagued by a fairly racist history in that sense, because Ellen White wrote a lot of horrific, racially charged, disparaging essays about how Black people and the tribes of Africa and the Native Americans were not even lesser people. They were actually a lower species. So to commit the sin of interracial marriage was actually technically bestiality in the eyes of God, and just horrible things like that. And this official stance from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, so far as I'm aware, is that they've never rescinded that or said, we apologize, this was awful. We just kind of paper over it and pretend it never happened. So as a kid, I was, I was given a few books. I think she wrote a book called Steps to Christ, and you'll have to forgive me because it's been so long. I don't remember specifically what they were about. I kind of rushed through them, and it's all just a lot of feel good, be a good person, look out for your neighbor. Nothing particularly toxic that I remember. But she was so prolific or plagiaristic and wrote so much that it's impossible to get through all of her writings unless you really commit to that as a life goal. And I think she wrote upwards of several hundred volumes of combined works. So some scholars have actually gone through that and looked at her published letters and some of the crazier things she said, and that never gets brought up in church, but she was firmly convinced that there were 30-foot tall people on the moon of Jupiter, one of the moons of Jupiter, which the Cassini mission showed no evidence of that we know of. She also tried to get a large donation to the church. Her husband is also a fairly famous Adventist figure, and he was more or less in a right state of mind. He didn't have any brain trauma as a child, so he used her as kind of a very similar actually to a freak show at the time, where the traveling circuses would take around people with deformities and profiteer off their afflictions. And so he would in some ways do that with Ellen White, like use her as a sideshow and try and get her to have a vision or a hallucination. He would often write under her name. And so to solicit a large donation once, he found some information from an astronomer in England at the time about how many moons there were around Saturn, I think. And he tried to say that he'd received a revelation, and vicariously through Ellen White had received a revelation from God that there are now I don't know, 57 moons or something around Saturn, which was at higher than the official count at the time, at least in the general audience's mind. So he was trying to say, I've received a vision, so you should give me money. You'll find this to be true, therefore it's real. Eventually that it was released that basically because he had advanced knowledge of this scientific finding, when it came out, he used it as a pseudo prophecy, I guess, fulfillment, and tried to gather money just like any grifter at the time would, and but it was for righteous reasons, so it was somehow okay. And again, church history does not talk about this, but what I find very cowardly is that they've never even taken a stance to rectify this. They've just said, you know, we're moving on. And to this day, there is a lot of lingering racism in the church's structure. There's on the large scale, the church is divided into a worldwide conference, and then I believe it's continental conferences. So there's like the North American division, and then I think the countries within that. It's not an intuitive structure, but it does divide the world into regions that are then headquartered within that region. Entirely separate from that, they have to this very day a Black conference, and I was always told growing up, I wondered, like, why is that even legal, much less ethical? And I was always told that it's for their own good because they want it that way.
Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah. I mean, I don't even think that's worth saying more about, because I mean, it's just so palpably disgusting.
Like give them their own group and let them feel like they're doing something important, right?
Yeah, and yeah, it's just awful. And I don't know the complex social entanglements that resulted in that group breaking off, but I do know that for a very long time, Black people were not considered welcome in the church. Just a personal anecdote that the church I grew up in, out in rural Washington State, this was not representative of very many other churches that I've encountered, but just because it was my home church as a kid, it stands out. There was a Black family that tried to join our church service once, and they were pushed out, and they were told that they were not welcome because they were stained fallen angels from Cain or something like that. Now, even in my church, to be fair, that there were lots of people that felt like that was way over the line, but you could also make a very clear argument that even though that's incredibly insensitive and just depraved moral behavior, it is justified if you look at the writings of Ellen White, who is on par with God. She is considered a mouthpiece for the voice of God in a revealed sense. So it's hard to argue with that if you really want to be a fundamentalist about the doctrine. And yeah, so I always felt that I guess maybe a turning point for me as a kid that sparked a skeptical eye towards what I was hearing is reading the book of Leviticus one day out of sheer boredom in class, and being so astonished that this was in there. And I'd never heard any of that, because we always had those Bible songs that you're taught as a kid. You go to church, and Seventh-day Adventists obviously worship on Saturday. So we would go to what they call Sabbath school, borrowed from the Jewish tradition. So we go to Sabbath school before church, and we learn all these kiddie songs and, just recite a lot of stuff. And we never heard any of the horrible things in Leviticus, which I'm sure you're all familiar with enough to get a picture of that. And I started realizing that the way people approach the Bible is to apply an external moral frame of reference and then filter what they read in the Bible through that. Because I'd never heard anyone debate the merits, the pros and cons of stoning someone to death if a woman had her period in the city limits on the Sabbath. I mean, no one ever took up the side of like, well, hang on, what if we should kill her? It was always, why is this wrong? And that seemed right, to think about it that way. But it also, it got me thinking that, why are we even considering this if we have to apply our own morality first and then see what's left? I mean, it seems like we're using a useless middleman to get to a moral conclusion. So
can I interrupt? Speaking
absolutely.
of the menstrual cycle, I don't know what it is about some of these religions that focus on that, But my husband and I, we were going to the Greek Orthodox Church because my husband is Greek, got married in the Greek Orthodox Church. Their rule is you cannot go up for communion if you're menstruating. And
Oh.
that
Of
pissed
course.
me off. So here I would be maybe, okay, if I'm sitting in the pews in the back with everybody going up front, does that mean I'm menstruating? Does everybody know that I'm menstruating because I'm sitting back here? It's
Unclean.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there are endless stories along that biological front that I experienced growing up. It's just very bizarre what a modern group of people just together seems to spend their time debating. And yeah, I find that incredibly insensitive. And also, Seventh-day Adventists are very into foot washing. And I've had it explained to me upwards of 1,000 times, and I still cannot remember what the point of it is. And why it's not more disgusting than it is virtuous. And it's partly my fault because I have a very short attention span for horse shit. So
I'll wear sandals and walk on the dirt floor.
Yeah, that makes more sense than anything I heard. But yeah, I don't know if I even remembered listening to the end of an explanation. It's just weird stuff like that. But then you have to get up there, and it's just very humiliating and degrading. And
so you actually
I don't know,
had to
remember
wash people's feet?
Yep.
Oh.
It just, I don't know. I never heard of a solid rebuttal to my idea of just taking a shower. I mean, I don't see what this adds, but sure. Seems like it makes it much bigger. Anyway, I mean, that's just one of 1,000 anecdotes. One of the weirder things for me is, and I was probably insufferable as a kid, and I will grant that to my family and my church. It probably wasn't fair. Questions I was asking probably were not what they were, pre-indoctrinated to deal with as Bible teachers. But I had to sit through an 8-week seminar on Revelation once, and I cannot imagine. It feels like a war crime to have to sit through that much. It's just what I would probably call cognitive dysentery. Every single night, you're hearing a 3-hour lecture on absolute incoherent nonsense, circular reasoning, Olympic feats of incredulity, and I was told that if I complained about it at all, that I was committing a sin. And I don't even know where to start in that. I mean, I heard, because a few weeks ago when we were talking about astronomy, I had mentioned that because Seventh-day Adventists aren't as wary of astronomy as they are of biology, which is a gateway to evolution, which is a gateway to hell, and geology and all that. They didn't know anything about astronomy. So when I would read about, the meteor storm in the late 1800s or the lunar eclipses, and then I would go to Bible class in the morning and hear that the moon turned red, which is a sign of, the atonement, or I don't remember, something like that, some Bible word in there. And I'm like, well, no, I actually read about that years ago, and it's an eclipse, and it's not spooky, and it happens all the time. And same thing with meteor showers. That wasn't the heavens falling. It was literally a predicted event that was awesome, but there's nothing, again, spooky or supernatural about it. And when I was being fed those same things as evidence for a non-claim, I mean, I kind of didn't even know how to take that seriously. So I got myself in a lot of trouble for calling out some of those things, because I just thought it was kind of funny at the time. My teachers did not, but
I have a
go
similar
ahead.
experience. I was coming home from a Nazarene church summer camp. So I was on the bus and we were coming home, and it was getting to be late at night, and there was a red, moon at that time. And I remember we were all looking out at the red moon, and we were all thinking it was the end of the world. We were experiencing the end of the world looking at that red moon, because we were taught the same thing, that it was something biblical.
Yep. Oh yeah, it's It's very strange. I had one pastor say that the Lord of the Rings, the whole series, was actually not written by Tolkien. Instead, it was literally written by the devil himself, as in Satan sat down in Microsoft Word and cranked out the Lord of the Rings. And everyone was nodding their heads in stoic agreement. I don't know. The humor is so ripe there, but you can't laugh at it in the moment. And I was even okay with going to church culturally up to a point, because I enjoy the community aspects. And in some churches, not everyone takes it all seriously. They're kind of like, the church is kind of the worst part of it, but we're all together and we meet each other every week. And I think there's a lot of good things to be said for that. As the communal experience of music, hymn singing is wonderful. I still enjoy that when I get to go play for a church. It's a very powerful moving experience. And I think it's a testament to the power of music that I don't remember hardly any of the words, and I never knew them even as a kid. I mean, I'd read them, but that never stuck to me. But the experience of singing together is very, very powerful. But when you have to sit through so much incoherence, and also when you find out that the community doesn't even have an interest in understanding, like I mentioned earlier, there's a sort of voluntary ignorance that is treated as a virtue, where the less you understand, the more it makes sense, weirdly enough. That never sat right with me. And what I found so refreshing about reading from astronomers and scientists in general is that there was it was entirely decentralized. There's no argument from authority. If something didn't make sense, they would explain it, and you could always find another explanation out there if you didn't understand something. So it was an incremental progression of ideas that led deeper and deeper, but they stood on the weight of thoughts before them. And I found it so endlessly suffocating to be in a religious environment where there's such little thought given to the hierarchy of logic and the arguments. And you mentioned the fear of hell as a kid, and I absolutely relate to that. Up till easily middle elementary school. I mean, I don't remember the year I kind of resolved that for myself, but I do remember clearly being afraid almost every night of going to sleep, because I don't know if something's going to happen, and I have no what Adventists call assurance of salvation. That might be more of a common term, but we use that a lot. And I was told by my parents, at least, that there was no guarantee. It could happen at any moment, and you may or may not be able to convince yourself that you're going to be saved. And so I had a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of fear over that, or saying or thinking the wrong thing, and then that might jeopardize my eternal soul. But it wasn't until I started realizing some more of the inconsistencies in the Bible, and not just the esoteric trivia. I mean, like the pinnacle foundations of the Bible, like the 10 Commandments, for example. I still to this day don't remember how exactly you get 10 out of it. If you just read the text and number them, it doesn't come out to 10, because they're kind of, the way it's divided is, it seems like somebody was trying to push the word count to get a nice even round number like 10. That got me thinking, wait, I almost am not sure if these are perfect. So I started asking some questions, and one question that stood out to me is, thou shalt not commit murder. Well, obvious. Why does that even need to be said? But let's, I guess, if you run with that a little bit, what technically constitutes murder? Because a few books before, I distinctly remember the massacre of 300 infants, and that was good. That was sanctioned by God, so that was all right. And I was told something more along the lines of, it was okay because God said so, because people couldn't think better than that on their own at the time. So then I started wondering, well, how would you apply that in a modern context? If murder is only a sin if you don't know better, then let's say you're manufacturing food or something like that. Like you're making something with a preservative in it that it saves you a lot of money, and it doesn't kill people per se, but it it statistically shortens your, this preservative might shorten your lifespan by a measurable amount, months, maybe a few years, but you can't really link it to that one thing. But we have lots of reasons to believe that it is detrimental to someone's lifespan. So you're, in the sense that you're ending someone's life slightly earlier than its natural course would take it, is that murder, or is that even wrong? And I never got answers even close to that. I got told that you're not relying on faith hard enough. You're seeking to challenge an authority, and that's bad. And in the scientific literature that I was reading, questions were good. I mean, it was rewarded. Like, the more you asked, the more you learned. But I felt that the more I probed some of these seemingly superficial boundaries on some of these ideas, the harder I would get pushed back. And it felt defensive more than it felt instructive or even honest and sincere. And I remember in probably about 6th grade, we had to take a class in apologetics, and the name of the class should be a red flag. And I remember asking, why do we need to have arguments against this if we're right? And it was just downhill from there. A lot of the arguments were just unbelievably shallow, and I had always been taught as a kid that, you know, the Earth is 6,000 years old and we were created, evolution is wrong. Then I was, well, why do we even need, why are we taking a class in what other people think about evolution if it's wrong? I mean, shouldn't we be focusing on what's true and noble and all that? And now I see why. I mean, it's a very early attempt to inoculate young minds against the challenge of reason later on. But in my particular case, I just, because I had access to some of those science books earlier, in a way that saved me. I was never even tempted to take most of that stuff seriously. And I had, you know, those crazy propaganda science books with the rock on one side, then the equal with the question mark, and then this weird biological mass of fins and arms and legs. And does this seem like this is possible? And like, yeah, well, seems like a simple argument maybe, but no, that seems wrong. So yeah, I just felt a lot of that seemed silly even as a kid. And it was only, yeah, I've left about, I guess, 5 years now. And the turning point for me was the big conference they had in 2015. Every 5 years, the church has a worldwide get together with 80,000 people. And most of my family, I should add, is either ministers or doctors. Most of them are missionaries around the world right now. So they usually get together with that. And at the time, I was invited by my horn instructor, my music teacher in college, to write a piece for their world conference for 80 brass players. And as a musician, I mean, you almost never get 80 players of any instrument together without having, it's very expensive to do that. So I thought, oh, this will be a great opportunity. I'll arrange a hymn for them. And so that part of it was very positive. I enjoyed that. But then during the actual services, they were taking votes on whether or not the Earth is 6,000 years young. And I mean, that is a hair-raising proposition. I mean, first of all, you can't decide that by vote. Also, you're wrong. And this is not really debatable science. This is a 150-year-old claim, and that's being charitable to the idea. But I think that the worst part for me was when they took a vote that women will not be considered equal members of the congregation. They're not allowed to participate in roles of leadership or influence. And I did hear some, you know, somewhat hopeful stories of certain factions of the church splintering off. I mean, a church here and there in particularly woke parts of the country, they would say, well, we're gonna do it anyway. What can you do to stop us? And so they do have a few female pastors, but when the group as a whole says we're not okay with that in 2015, I mean, I don't see a lot of reasons to stick around. And at that point, I had already fit God in such a small box as to be essentially immeasurably useless. And any divine, I guess, power in the universe seemed so far-fetched that I didn't really feel like I was detaching myself from that had been gone or atrophying for so long for me. but the community was what I felt the loss with, maybe more than anything. But yeah, the church also has a very aggressively homophobic stance, and they'll downplay it in their literature sometimes, but in practice, one of the most heart-wrenching and disgusting things I've ever seen was my college, which was Bible college out in Washington State. They explicitly banned a gay rights group, that a student club basically, that wanted to start on campus. They said we're not comfortable with that. There was a film that was being run around through different parts of the church called Seventh Gay Adventist, and it was basically a documentary of the gay community's experience in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I had a few friends who were gay at the time, and they felt like it's not a safe environment to come out. But the few that did take a stance were met with just fierce opposition from administration. And there were a few spiritual leaders. The spiritual vice president of the college, which is a real position at the college I went to, he said this is absolutely not happening on our campus. And so then the church as a whole reinforces that and says that they preach this very condescending doctrine of tolerance, where you hate the sin but love the sinner. And I find that almost worse than just overt homophobia, because I can't imagine the smugness being any more tolerable than just the sheer honest hatred of what you don't understand or what you are conditioned to not like. And the fact that people were okay with that they didn't prompt some sort of massive outcry or outrage, I just felt like these are not my people at all. And my goal is eventually to move into education full time. And what I told my parents at the time is that I feel that as a future educator, I'm not comfortable even being casually affiliated with a group that is marginalizing vulnerable parts of the population. And even if no one knows that, for my own sake, I don't think I'm going to sleep well at night knowing that I am part of a group that is making it hard for other people to live their honest lives. And I was not met with acceptance on that, and that was kind of a deal breaker. And so I have not been part of the church ever since then. I was baptized as a kid because that was you just had to do it as a rite of passage, I guess. So I wrote a letter and just, in no uncertain terms, said I'm not comfortable with any part of this. Please take my name off. And yeah, that was about it. I don't have a lot of friends actually that are still in that world. Some of them, the only friends I have from my college days were the ones that really weren't taking it that seriously to begin with. But yeah, I've seen quite a few people that just fall right back into it. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle where you now work for the church. You might teach at a school that's run by the church. You're not allowed to speak out against it, even if you do have questions. And yeah, it's just, I felt like it's not a morally responsible community to be a part of, even though there are positive aspects to it, undoubtedly. For me, it was just a clear, I can't take the baggage, and I don't need it. I don't believe that any sort of organized religion has any semblance of a monopoly on morality. So I'm moved on and been very happy with that ever since. So yeah, I've talked a lot, but I kind of want to hear
So Eric, have you
reactions,
been,
thoughts,
do,
comments.
do you feel like you are working through trauma, like John was saying?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it stays with you. I'm kind of endlessly fascinated by the psychology of religion, actually. I do, oh, you mentioned the movie A Thief in the Night. I've never actually seen it, but one, I guess, sort of cathartic release for me is I found a podcast called God Awful Movies, and they watch the movies for you. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's great. So I've heard them review that, and I saw a lot of that Christian propaganda as a kid. I didn't see that one specifically, but the cheesy production values and the shameless pandering is just, it's kind of amazing. So I hear a lot of people talk about those things, but yeah, about the trauma aspect of it. in my case, it's more of a personal thing. Like I didn't have issues with the community as a whole. I went to a small country Bible church, or fundamentalist church, I should say, up to about early high school. Excuse me. And after that, I went to a high school out in very rural Washington State, where you lived in a dorm, went to classes and church, and never left the property pretty much ever, maybe once a month. So it was more annoying than it was traumatizing. I guess I had a sense of cynicism that got me through a lot. I just kind of had to grin and bear it, but I didn't have too much actually from the community, more in a personal sense, because my dad was a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and there's some psychological issues in my family that went undiagnosed for too long that led to some personal, emotional, and physical trauma. The part that I find hardest and that I want to look out for in the next generation as a teacher is that you're not really given a safe place to find help if you need it. In my particular case, with my dad being a religious leader, you know, he's given this more or less an infallible platform, and you can't really challenge that as a kid. You just kind of have to internalize that and deal with it on your own. At an early age, I also remember doing the anointing thing, the laying on of hands and the oil, and that was actually more terrifying than anything, because my parents got real weird about it, and we just did this ritual incantation almost, and it was very unsettling. Actually, it stood with me because my parents were very cagey about what was going on, and we drove up in the mountains, and yeah, I remember it really did feel like that was maybe one of our darkest cult-ish moments, because yeah, we were just basically going purely on ritualism that day, and it was weird. It was very strange. Didn't work, but yeah, it's very bizarre. So those kind of things stood with me. The fear of hell for a long time bothered me until I actually had to get to a point for myself where I remember distinctly saying, I don't even want to go to heaven if it is real, because the guy that wrote this book has not, this is just a crude first draft at best. If he was really serious about it, I don't think he meant it here, and I don't want to be a part, I don't want to live for all of eternity with someone this sloppy. Like that doesn't sound like an incentive to me. So I had to get to that point where I didn't view heaven as a reward, but more of a punishment. And then I kind of was able to cope with that as it happened over the course of my life. But yeah, lingering trauma, I don't know. It's just, I feel more pity and compassion when I see people still in church now. One of the churches that I sometimes will sub for is the Church of Christ Scientist, which is the Mary Baker Eddy group. They don't believe in modern medicine, and when I go play for those services, it's truly heartbreaking, because you see it's a small congregation usually, and there's a lot of people that are going through obvious physical ailments that are very treatable by modern medicine, and just I try not to let myself go down the dark path of imagining all their backstories, but it's not hard to see how even primitive dentistry, optometry, physical therapy could have prevented a lot of the things they're suffering from. And I take it as a responsibility as a musician and an atheist in a church. And I don't mention that I'm an atheist because I don't think that's productive in that setting. But I do view the power of music as incredibly transformative. And so even though they're not going to get a lot from the words that are being spewed from the pulpit, I always can feel a connection at a very deep level with people when I'm playing. So I try to bring music that they're not going to get typically, and I try to take it seriously. I mean, it's not, as a professional musician, it's not really a professional outlet. I mean, it's not as artistically rewarding, but feeling that connection with people and maybe being the one positive thing that might happen in their life that day. I can only imagine the behind the scenes struggles they're going through, and So I go out of my way to be nice and try to connect with them and be friendly, because I know that they're probably not going to get that at home, probably not going to get an honest connection with people in a church setting. So I just don't bring in any of my backstory at all. I'm just there to maybe do what I can to be a bright spot in their day and treat them with respect, even though I completely disagree with their life decisions. And I don't view it, and sadly enough, I don't think a lot of them made decisions that ended there. I think that's just the path that life takes for some people that don't feel the compulsive need to challenge ideas. Some people find a valuable sort of retreat into consensus, and that's very therapeutic for a lot of people. So no matter how absurd the ideas are, if there's people there, it can be enough. And I don't hold that against the individuals. I take more issue with the ideas that led to that and the leadership. But yeah, I think it's just helped me overall see people in church with a renewed sense of compassion and sympathy. And I understand how they got there, because I've known the majority of people in my life up till a couple of years ago were church people, and often for very sincere reasons. And so I don't think all of them are all awful people hell-bent on destroying the world in the name of Christ. I think there are some of those, certainly, but generally they're just doing the best they know how. And I don't think that's something to attack. But that being said, some of the ideas are just, I mean, unavoidably comical. And so I don't think that they deserve anything less than ridicule. But the people that follow them, they're people. And I think if our goal is to look out for our fellow man and make life better than when we enter the world, they're still people too, regardless of what they believe. And the nice thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe it, unlike religion. So
Yeah, I thank you, Eric. I think it's amazing that, I mean, your transition away from your church is probably fairly recent compared to my transition away from my church. And I think that if my family had not tested the Bible to see if it was really true and what it said it would deliver, we would just be the basic old churchgoers, enjoying the community, not questioning anything, just la-di-da, right? But because we tested it and it just didn't pan out and made us look foolish, that helped me kind of, turn the other way. And I know you're a musician, and that's what's getting you back into that church, to share your music. But, and I am not a musician, but I just cringe at the thought of going back in to previous churches for whatever reason. I feel scared that, they're going to suck me back in somehow,
yeah. Oh, I very much relate to that. I listened to Christopher Hitchens on the way to and from those services. I have on many occasions actually taken in like Dan Dennett's Breaking the Spell or something to read inside of a hymnal or something during the service, because I'm only there as a paid participant. I don't have anything more than that, and I don't want to do something intentionally inflammatory, because I don't think that's helpful, but for my own sake. Also, one criticism this is my pet interest, I guess you could say, but it's just boring. I mean, I think that is a valid critique of a lot of religious ideas. Like, I can't sit through a full hour sermon on something that I could essentially paraphrase in about half a page. I mean, there's not a lot of content there. The ideas are paper thin. You could blow on them and they'd fall over, and yet they somehow make it span for a full hour. And I can't do it. My mind goes absolutely insane. So I find ways to challenge myself musically in there. I'll play something that is a hard piece or something just to keep myself, if nothing else, awake. But yeah, it's hard. And sometimes the sermons I've sat through are egregiously immoral. I remember distinctly last year playing for it was a Presbyterian church. I was substituting as their organist that day, and the entire sermon was about if you sheep don't wake up and truly believe in hell, then nothing really matters, and most of you are going there. And I was like, this is just not
How do
helpful
people
at
sit
best.
through that? How do people sit through that? I don't get it.
Yeah, well, I went to a Catholic mass once as a musician as well, and I was just substituting, so I'm not familiar with the Catholic system as well. And you know, when you're a church musician, I will never take a full-time job. I actually find the ethical question of is it right to take money even as a musician, when I think I'm being part of the solution of anything, but I don't always feel right about taking money from people that I think need it more than they think they do. And I'm actually not even 100% sure that I think playing as a sub is okay, but my rent check overrides my morality there. So I'm willing to take that gamble for the time being.
The
But
Lord will provide it for you if you don't.
yeah, I've tried cashing that in. It's not an acceptable currency. When it comes to the Catholic Church, though, I haven't played for a lot of masses, and there was it was amazing. The cantor opened up with this, and it was about probably 200-300 people in a Wednesday night mass. It was the Ash Wednesday service, which I actually just learned like 2 years ago what that was. I always saw the smudges from some people, and I never understood what that was until had explained to me when I was playing for the service. So he opened it by saying that there was a church approved apparition in Argentina. And first of all, well, okay, just to clarify, they mean there was a ghost of a saint that has been approved by the church as actually having happened. And, you know, it never happens in a country with like a functioning government or iPhones, unfortunately, but you know, that's for another time. But he started out by saying that, and I actually was astounded how quiet it got instantly. Like this whole group, there's just, you know, idle chattering before the service starts. And then he says, somebody in our religion legit saw a ghost. And I had forgotten what it's like to be in a group that actually believes that. And they were legitimately scared. You could feel palpable tension in the air. And it was very, I don't know what the right word is. It stood out to me a lot more than I thought it would. And then, yeah, the rest of the sermon was just about how when you go to the bank, statistically, 3 other people might be going to heaven, but most of the people you're talking with will be burning in eternal hellfire. And how do you view that? And I couldn't understand the morality. And, you know, the comedic icing on this cake was the fact that the guy that was giving the sermon, I was told later, most people didn't really like him, but he was substituting because the full-time priest was, surprise, surprise, suspended for sexual impropriety with a minor.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, I mean, it's not all Catholic churches, obviously, but it's just very poetic that happened to be the one encounter I had in recent memory with that. So yeah, there's so much there. We're just grazing the surface of all of this, but you know, I don't think it's misplaced curiosity to be curious about what for a lot of people is their entire life. And certainly myself, growing up in a community where you were in a religious bubble 24/7, the only contact I had outside of church school and then my church approved friends was the community youth orchestra. And that was my one breath of fresh air a week, because people were just more interested in like getting good at their instruments than they were at anything else. And in a religious community, you find there's a veil of insincerity that people need to kind of put on for their own protection. There's, you know, the old thing about opening your eyes in prayer. It's kind of like double jeopardy, because you can't out them without being caught yourself. But people would do that, like in a small farming community. They would keep tabs on each other, and you know, the latest hot goss was who was caught shopping after sundown on Friday night for groceries. Like hardly a top 10 crime, but nevertheless, that's all people would talk about. And yeah, it was very interesting. And so I felt like people were not open to ideas, because you never knew if it was going to be a sincere discussion or if someone was just testing you to to see if you were fully committed. And you know, sociologists have talked about groups and cults forming by having high cost initiation rituals where you, like Scientology, for example, you have to hand over the deed to your house if you're going to be serious. And, you know, you've made a demonstration that you are committed in a very tangible way, and you made a commitment that's not easily reversible. And I think that part of the sticking power of a lot of religions is that they deliberately go over the top, making a pretty steep claim that if you're not willing to say, I accept that, then you're not one of us. And I've actually heard a really interesting discussion on that old email scam about the Nigerian prince who randomly contacts people. And I'm sure you've all heard some permutation of that. But it boils down to somebody from Nigeria claiming that I need to send you a little bit of money because I'm the prince and my father's in political prison or something. And if you don't send me that money, I can't send you even more. And somehow it's portrayed in a way that you'll get money if you give a lot first. And the whole point behind it being so outrageously stupid in the very first sentence is that they don't want to the scammers don't want to waste time with people that they could lead a little ways into it and then they get wise to it. It's much more financially lucrative if they just go for the crazy people, the people that read like, this is the Prince of Nigeria. I need you to send me $3,000 by tomorrow. This is real and happening. Give me your bank routing information so I can send it. If you don't buy all that right away, then you're probably not going to be an easy mark. They want the people that are going to be like, oh yeah, that sounds legit, I'll go for it. And it just cuts down on their filtering. So I view religions have a similar aspect to that. But yeah, having grown up in a more fundamentalist strain of Seventh-day Adventism, I can say that's definitely true. I mean, you have to believe that Jesus is coming at any second. You have to pay all your tithes. All these little tiny micro ethical sins are considered basically on par with murder. You know, there's really not a lot of gray area, and you basically have to be in an all or none situation. So yeah, it's fascinating. I love hearing about it. I love hearing other people's experiences, and if nothing else, because it just took up such a huge part of my life. I don't know what it's like to have been religiously neutral growing up. Thankfully, I had interests of my own that kind of extend way beyond that. But culturally, yeah, I definitely am still opening my eyes to the rest of the world. And sometimes it just catches me when I reflect back on a childhood memory, how absolutely bizarre it is. And it didn't stand out as strange at the time. It just,
Right.
I can't get over how many of those little daily epiphanies I keep coming up with.
And back on the trauma, I know I was saying that I don't really have trauma, but one thing that I did miss, I started to realize I'm missing a way to deal with anxiety. And for instance, I had a situation where I was anxious about a situation, and I was kind of like debilitated. I just wasn't quite sure, what to do. I didn't have control of the situation. And I did not believe in God at the time. And I said, what did I do in the past when I was in a Christian church? What did I do in these situations? Well, I prayed to God and I gave it to God, like kind of a physical, like.
You broke out again on us, Cheryl.
We lost the sound,
We
Cheryl.
lost the sound.
We don't hear you. We're not hearing you.
Can you guys hear me?
Now we do.
Oh, you're back.
I hear you.
About 15 seconds back,
Put your thumbs up if you
audio
can hear
dropped
me.
out.
Okay. For some reason, I've lost your audio, but I'll keep going. So what can I do now, being an atheist, to do the same thing? And I didn't know what to do. So I actually said, well, God, I don't believe you, but I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to give this to you. And I felt the burden lift from me. And it's because I wasn't ruminating over it anymore. I just kind of gave it to somebody else, and I felt like I lowered my anxiety. And so after that fact, I was trying to figure it out. What does this mean? What can I be doing as an atheist that I don't have to believe I'm giving something up over to God to ask for help? And as I started learning meditation practices, atheists can really get a lot of benefit out of meditation. And there's so many different types of meditation you can take in your mind. You're just closing your eyes, and you can take something that you're worried about and physically put it in a bowl in front of you. Okay? All it is an act of moving something out of the forefront of your mind. You stop ruminating about it. The problem is still there, but you're not going to ruminate about it. And it relieves your anxiety. And so I've learned how to do things to feel like I'm dealing with my stress, even as an atheist, and I don't have to believe in God anymore.
I completely connect with that. A big part of my coping strategy for life has come from listening to Sam Harris, and I'm sure you probably come across him at some point. He has a podcast where he talks about all sorts of ideas, sometimes religious ones, but he also has a separate program where he offers guided meditations and basically explains the process of mindfulness and meditation. And I find a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram between prayer and mindfulness. It's very, very similar. And I think prayer gets a lot of things right up to the point where it's now handed over to God and then wait for a response. The idea of internally reflecting on your life and reflecting on your goals and just having an honest internal conversation with yourself is very, very effective and powerful. And I find a lot of that mimics it, or prayer mimics that effective behavior, more or less borrowed from mindfulness practices. And I think it's important and very helpful. And I always wondered as a kid, like when you're forced to pray, I hated the performative prayers, which a lot of people would do, like pray in front of the class, pray in front of church. And it would pretty quickly devolve into just a personal laundry list of grievances with their own life. And, it wasn't all that sincere. But when you practice that on your own and take the showmanship out, I think it is a very, very effective way to just process your life.
Well, just to break in a little bit here, because again, I was raised very modern. My mother was a good Methodist. I can go into more later detail there, but just in this line we're talking right now, my brother and I would go to bed at night as little kids, and Mom would come in and we'd say our prayers. And the main thing was just a little intro, and then it was the God blesses. And just nobody, to my mind, we weren't asking for miracles. We were just saying, God bless Mom and Dad and Aunt Susie and different people and things like that. And that went, for while I was growing up. I moved well away from that in my adulthood. Here, 8-10 years ago, I had some things going on that really felt the hole in my life, and I started just saying a prayer at night, and I still do fairly frequently. I don't think, I know I'm not looking for supernatural blessing on these people, but it just seems like I'm taking their names and saying, I appreciate what they've done, and I wish good things for their lives. And I don't know if I don't think I'm helping them. I don't think there's any ESP going from me to them, but it helps me to feel good that I'm saying good things about people that were important to my life. I've read some places about, atheists aren't really atheists if they pray. So I don't know if I'm really praying or if I'm just repeating some things that I learned to make myself feel better. Thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's perfectly valid to retain thoughts that might wash over you that you might otherwise not have any reason to store long term. And it gives you a way to check in with yourself and see where you are, like in terms of your own progress. If you want to set goals for yourself, or remind yourself to think about other people or specific things that you might think of during the day. And then if you just set aside time and say like, hey, I want to remember that thought later on, or come back to it when I have more time and things are a little calmer, it's a very effective technique. I mean, I think it's just very similar to journaling in that sense. Gives yourself an excuse to explore your temporary headspace before it disappears, in a way that you wouldn't necessarily need to, and it's easy to overlook things. So yeah, I don't know if prayer, I'm a little hesitant to put the same label on it, just because it's been so heavily co-opted by organized religion to mean a specific idea with clearly implied supernatural overtones. But I agree completely with the concept and very much relate to that. I think I personally would use terms more like reflection or meditation. I've heard meditation used in a religious setting as well. So, but contemplating, reflecting, whatever it's called, I think it's still very helpful.
Also, a sense of gratitude, feeling grateful for things and thinking about things that you're grateful for, like the people that, gave you some good advice or that you appreciate, can be part of it, I think. Yeah. Also, hey, Eric, one of the things you said just stuck in my mind. He said, what did he say? God, no, shoot. God is measurably useless. I thought that was an interesting comment. I'd like to hear more from Chuck and maybe Lou also about their experience. Through a time it's almost 5, but but before that, I want to add one more thing that I think about as a child. The things that were traumatizing to me as a non-believer growing up, was 2 things that really frightened me. One was death, and knowing, that I'm not going to heaven or hell, going nowhere. That was hard to accept, the thought of, nothingness and forever. And the other thing that scared me was the thought of infinity. Scared me, and the concept of billions of years, scared me. And that those are hard things to grasp, and but anyway. And also one thing I wanted to the last thing I want to mention is my great grandfather on my mother's side was a Lutheran bishop in Minnesota and Iowa, covered Minnesota and Iowa. So there's definitely some background, I guess, the cultural background, like I grew up, in that kind of Lutheran kind of situation with my mom, like, be seen and not heard and things like that. So there's a cultural thing. And I embrace some cultural Christian things too. Like, hey, Christmas is Christmas, I'm not going to call it a social, winter solstice, whatever. It's Christmas. That's what you call it. That's what it is. You celebrate it your own way. But anyway, Chuck, do you have more?
You just have a little bit here. Again, my grandfather, my mother's father, was a Methodist minister in China at the turn of the last century. He was a teacher mostly, and I just think, he did not have religious credentials, but it was just from a nice family, and he was a nice Christian man, and he was a teacher, and he wanted to teach the heathens, of course. And he and his wife went to China in the 1890s or so, and several of my aunts and uncles were born. My mother was born in China, and grew up over there. And but they were, and again, then go to my mother. She was a social worker in the 30s before the war. Very modern thinking woman, and raised us to be good kids, and said our prayers at night, and went to church with her. And I'm in junior high, I went to communion, but it was never any press of, if you don't do this, you'll go the wrong place. It was just, well, of course, everybody's a Christian. We had to have God out there to build the world for us. It just doesn't, there's no other thought that you could be any other direction. I remember in college, a wing advisor when I was a freshman. This guy was a 22-year-old, big old guy, or young man. But he introduced us one day to Aquinas's proofs of God and logical proofs that, and then I remember even at the time when I was 18, they weren't exactly proofs of God, of the way the God of the Bible. There may be demonstrations of things we don't know, but beyond that, I'm not sure. And I just kind of moseyed along with my life. My first wife was Mennonite Brethren, and her family were farmers, moderately successful farmers, and not this. They were not like living on the commune or anything like that. I think they were a little horrified that Donna was going out with me. I wasn't professing atheism or anything like that, but I was just kind of a Methodist young man, and they were real nice to me. I've always appreciated that. And she came in to me and with me having a background like maybe you, Cheryl, had said, or she was the church was real close, and she did everything through the church, and she was a little worried about what I was saying, but by a few years into our marriage, she was pretty much divorced from the real strict teachings of the church. And our son, who's a young man of 48 now, was not really brought up much in the church. And he's bringing up 2 granddaughters right now, and they're not going to Sunday school. And I think they're going to survive, going to live a good life. My son does. He's a hardworking man. He isn't looking back at any church person to have instilled the right to that he will not kill or any of those other things. It's nice to know that people can grow up without that church background. I kind of, again, went back to it here 6-8 years ago, and I was attending the Methodist Church up in Brighton. Real intelligent young man in his 30s, a pastor, and he gave good sermons. He's very thoughtful, and I talked to him a few times, and then I had him out to my house, and we talked about. I'm like into physics, into the that kind of thing, and a religious person says, well, the world had to be made by God. And I said, the anthropic principle. And he kind of looked at me and that the universe wasn't made for us. We were made for the universe. We just kind of developed, never thought of that. And as I say here, 2 years ago or so, I was going to church mostly just on Sunday, and I'd go after church into the men's group and just kind of listen and talk, and nothing of any great consequence. But again, that's the sermon that he gave. It was a very thoughtful sermon, and he got going along about saying the world is a real tough place to live in. You all have problems. You just can't quite handle them yourself. So you just believe in God, and Jesus will help you. And that was the last straw. I haven't been back to that church. The next week, there was a pancake breakfast at the Hub that I learned about. And the people there were very friendly. And it's funny, my neighbor here, Tim, I've talked to him a little bit and brought him, and he was brought up Catholic. And I think when I began first talking to him about the Hub, and he wanted to go down there, and he was surprised that people didn't have horns coming out of their ears. That's what he thought he was going to see.
But they don't.
They're cut off someplace.
Oh, if I got by.
Yeah. But it's been interesting to hear the thoughts of the folks who were brought up so deeply imbibed in the church, and that's just the way the world is. That's just the way everybody is, and that's the way I was brought up and the way I lived for a lot of years. So it's been good to get in with a group and talk about some other possibilities.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, going back to kind of what Carol was talking about. Cheryl was talking about, like trying to figure out how to get comfort and moral direction, without religion. And, that's something we need to promote. Like, okay, how as atheists, how do we cope, with things if we don't have, spiritual connection, and what are the ways to look at things like talk about meditation and Sam Harris, things like that. You know, these are really good things to work on. How do we survive as atheists and how do we cope? Anyway, just a comment. Anyway, continue, Jack.
Well, I think it's after
Oh,
5.
it is. Oh, it is.
Yeah. So, thank you, Eric, for sharing your story, and I'm glad that you guys were able to listen to me. That was therapeutic for me as well, just to share my story. And Eric,
We'll have Lou talk one of these days too.
Sorry, what was that?
we'll have to have Lou talk.
Hear Lou's story.
Oh, yeah, yeah.